Clara Mitchell had always thought she could manage her life perfectly. At 34, she was ambitious, independent, and socially magnetic. Living in the heart of Seattle, she had a thriving career in marketing, close-knit group of friends, and a life that many envied. But beneath her confident exterior, she carried secrets. Secrets that had the potential to unravel everything she had carefully built. For months, she had been balancing two relationships, one with Ryan, her dependable and steady partner, and the other with Ethan, a bold and exciting writer. Each offered something different. Ryan gave her comfort, stability, and a sense of being understood. Ethan brought adventure, laughter, and an intensity that made her heart race. She had convinced herself it was manageable. She was careful, strategic, and disciplined. She always made sure no paths crossed and every encounter was timed perfectly. For a while, it worked. But life, as it often does, had a way of introducing complications where there had been none. One rainy evening, as Clara stepped out of her apartment to meet Ethan at a cozy downtown cafe, she noticed someone standing across the street. At first, she thought it was just her imagination. A man leaning against a lamppost, head slightly tilted, watching her with an intensity she had never felt before. His posture was relaxed, casual. But there was something in the way he observed her, a quiet attentiveness that made her stomach tighten. Clara's first instinct was denial. Perhaps it was a stranger, a passerby, someone waiting for a friend. She shook her head and kept walking, telling herself that she was imagining things. Still, the feeling of being watched persisted, a strange mix of unease and curiosity. She hurried to the cafe, reminding herself that the rain made everyone more noticeable and that it was probably nothing. Inside the cafe, Ethan was waiting with a grin, holding 2 steaming cups of coffee. His presence always brought warmth and a sense of exhilaration to Clara's life. He teased her about the rain and shared a funny story about his latest writing assignment. For a moment, she forgot about the stranger outside. But even as she laughed, her eyes kept flicking toward the window, scanning the street unconsciously. The shadow of those intense, unseen eyes lingered in her mind, refusing to be dismissed. Days passed, and Clara tried to ignore it. But the feeling of being observed continued to creep into her daily life. She saw fleeting glimpses and reflections, a shadow near the bookstore she frequented, a parked car that lingered too long across the street. Each time, her heart would quicken, a mixture of fear and fascination washing over her. She could not shake the thought that someone was watching. Quietly, patiently, and with a purpose she couldn't yet understand. The next week, Clara met Ryan at a small wine bar after work. Ryan was calm, steady, and effortless in his charm. He listened to her talk about deadlines, campaigns, and mundane office dramas with that reassuring smile that made her feel understood. Yet even in his comforting presence, her thoughts drifted to the stranger outside. His gaze, silent but piercing, seemed to have found a way into her consciousness, raising questions she wasn't ready to answer. That night, after she returned home, Clara checked her apartment windows. The reflections, the street below, nothing. Empty sidewalks, parked cars, the distant hum of city life. Still, a subtle chill ran down her spine. Someone had been watching her, perhaps for days, unnoticed, unchallenged. She tried to rationalize it. Too much stress, too much juggling of 2 lives, or maybe it was just her imagination. But even as she told herself these things deep down, she knew that the stranger was real and that his presence signaled something that could no longer be ignored the next morning. Clara attempted to carry on with her routine. Meetings, phone calls, and emails filled her schedule. She met Ethan for brunch, laughing at his animated descriptions of characters he had created. But a part of her remained distracted, constantly scanning the streets, looking for the figure who had etched himself into her mind. His observation felt almost like a mirror, reflecting her own duplicity and the fragile balance she maintained. One afternoon, Clara left the office and noticed him again. He was across the street, sitting on a park bench with a notebook in hand. He didn't look threatening. He wasn't hiding or sneaking. He just watched, calmly, yet his presence made the air heavier around her. Every step she took toward her car felt like a performance, every movement measured and scrutinized. She wondered, did he know about Ryan or Ethan? Could he see the truth she tried so carefully to conceal? That night, Clara sat at her kitchen table, sipping tea, replaying the day in her mind. She knew she had to confront the reality of being watched. For months, she had lived on the edge of two lives, thinking herself clever and untouchable. Now she felt exposed. The stranger was not just an observer. He was a symbol of accountability she could no longer ignore. A few days later, as Clara left Ethan's apartment after a late meeting, the stranger approached her. Calm, composed, unassuming, yet undeniably present. "You're careful," he said quietly, almost a statement rather than a question. "But some things can't be hidden forever." Clara's heart raced. She wanted to demand answers, to ask who he was and why he was following her. But there was something in his tone, not judgmental, not accusatory, just quiet awareness that made her hesitate. For the first time, she felt seen in a way she had never experienced. Seen not as a lover or a partner, not as a professional, but as someone with secrets, choices, and vulnerabilities. She walked away without answering, feeling a strange mixture of fear, curiosity, and awe. She understood something crucial in that moment. The delicate balance she had maintained between two worlds was about to shift, and nothing would ever feel the same again. The man watching her was not a threat. He was a reflection of her own reality, a reminder that choices, no matter how carefully hidden, have consequences, and that some truths demand confrontation. And in the quiet of her apartment that night, Clara realized that her life had become a delicate dance on the edge of exposure. She had two men, two paths, and now a silent witness who would not let her ignore the truth. The tension, the thrill, and the inevitability of change were already shaping the next chapter of her story, one that she could no longer control, only face. The rain tapped softly against her window, echoing the turmoil in her chest. And as she drifted to sleep, the image of the stranger lingered, eyes steady, calm, and watching, a quiet promise that the balance she had cherished was about to be broken. After that first encounter with the stranger, Clara Mitchell felt the world shift beneath her feet. Days that had once been predictable now carried an undercurrent of tension. Every time she left her apartment, she wondered if his eyes were following her, noting every movement, every choice, every lie she tried to hide. At first, she told herself it was paranoia. She was juggling two men, a demanding job, and the normal stresses of life. Surely the anxiety was normal, but the feeling of being watched was undeniable, persistent, and strangely unnerving. Her schedule became more complicated than ever. Mornings with Ryan were steady, comfortable, filled with laughter over coffee, and soft conversations about work and the weekend. His presence was grounding, reassuring. He never asked too many questions, never probed too deeply. The perfect companion for someone trying to balance a double life. With Ryan, Clara could relax into warmth, lean into familiarity, and forget, at least temporarily, the thrill she craved elsewhere. Afternoons, however, were reserved for Ethan. He was everything Ryan was not: spontaneous, daring, intoxicatingly unpredictable. He challenged her intellect, teased her with witticisms, and reminded her that life could be an adventure if only she allowed herself to embrace it. Every encounter with him was a rush of energy and excitement. The contrast between the two men was stark. Yet it was the balance between them that Clara thought she could manage, like walking a tightrope above a deep, dark canyon. But the stranger changed everything. It started subtly. She would catch reflections of someone on rainy sidewalks as she hurried from one meeting to the next. A fleeting shadow in a bookstore window. A figure on a distant bench who seemed oddly familiar, almost like he knew where she would be before she arrived. He never interfered, never spoke unless she was caught by chance, but his presence became impossible to ignore. Each moment she felt his gaze was a mirror, reflecting back the choices she had made and the fragile world she had tried to maintain. One afternoon, as Clara exited a cafe after lunch with Ethan, she saw him again, the stranger, casually leaning against a lamppost. notebook in hand, eyes following her every movement. She froze briefly, unsure whether to confront him or run. The curiosity outweighed her fear. She approached slowly, keeping her voice steady. "Can I help you?" she asked, her words a mix of irritation and intrigue. The man looked up calmly. His expression was unreadable, yet oddly comforting. "I don't mean to scare you," he said. "I just notice things, patterns, choices. People often hide from themselves, but I notice anyway." Clara hesitated. His words struck a chord, unsettling yet truthful. "Who are you?" she asked, though a part of her already feared the answer. "Someone who observes," he replied softly. "Not to judge, but to remind. Sometimes people forget the reality of their own actions until someone else points it out silently, carefully." The interaction left Clara unsettled but also strangely awake. His presence was no longer an anomaly. It was a lens through which she could see the impact of her decisions. She realized that despite her careful planning, she had been living a life on borrowed balance. The thrill of her double relationships was tainted with anxiety she hadn't allowed herself to acknowledge. The days that followed were filled with tension. Ryan's steady reliability became both comforting and guilt-inducing. Clara loved his simplicity, his patience, his loyalty. Every moment with him reminded her of the stability she could have, the life she could live without complication. And yet, every glance toward the streets, every shadow near a cafe reminded her of the stranger who watched, forcing her to confront the duality she had maintained. Ethan's presence, by contrast, was intoxicating. Each encounter with him felt like a reprieve from reality, a reminder that life could be unpredictable and thrilling. His voice, animated and playful, made her laugh in ways she hadn't in months. Every joke, every tease, every suggestion of an adventure created a tension within her, a pull between comfort and exhilaration, responsibility and desire. The stranger became a silent force in her life, observing without interference, yet influencing every choice she made. His presence was a constant mirror, reflecting the truth she could no longer deny. Clara realized that he was not there to disrupt, to punish, or to interfere. He was there to make her see herself, to show her the fragility of a life built on secrets and fleeting thrills. One rainy afternoon, Clara left Ethan's apartment and noticed him again. Closer this time, seated on a park bench as if waiting for her. She approached cautiously, unsure whether to confront or flee. He looked up, calm and composed. Yet there was an undeniable intensity in his gaze. "You can't keep running from yourself," he said quietly. "You think you're managing two worlds, but the truth is, someone always notices. You can hide from others, but not from yourself." Claire's heart pounded. She had always prided herself on control, on strategy, on foresight. And yet here was someone who saw beyond her careful facade. The words resonated, striking chords of fear, guilt, and awareness. She felt exposed, vulnerable in a way she had not experienced before. Over the following weeks, the tension grew. Every decision, every meeting with Ryan or Ethan was tinged with the consciousness of being observed. Even mundane moments, picking up groceries, walking to the bus, ordering lunch, carried the weight of scrutiny. The stranger's presence transformed her life from a series of calculated choices into a suspenseful journey where each step had consequence. One evening, Clara found a note slipped under her apartment door. "Some truths cannot be ignored forever. Reflect before it's too late." Her hands trembled as she read it. The message was simple, but its implications were profound. Someone had been watching carefully for days, perhaps weeks. Her actions, her choices, her secret balancing act had not gone unnoticed. And now she could no longer pretend that the delicate equilibrium she had maintained was sustainable. The next day, Clara met with Ryan. She found herself watching him more closely than usual, noticing the little gestures she had taken for granted, the way he smiled when he remembered small details about her life, the warmth in his tone when he asked about her day, the comfort in simply sitting across from him. She realized that she had been neglecting the depth of connection that existed between them, distracted by her own pursuits and excitement elsewhere. Later, with Ethan, the contrast became even sharper. His energy was infectious, his words captivating, his laughter irresistible. Yet even in these moments of thrill, Clara felt the weight of the stranger's observation pressing on her conscience. The adrenaline and exhilaration were dulled by the realization that someone had been watching her choices, noting her duplicity, and reminding her that the path she was on was unsustainable. The stranger had become an invisible force guiding her toward self-awareness. He did not judge or accuse, but his presence made her see the implications of her decisions. She began to understand that love, connection, and trust were fragile, and that the thrill of secrecy could never substitute for honesty and integrity. One rainy evening, after leaving Ethan, she finally stopped at the park where she had seen him so often. He was seated on the bench, notebook in hand, as always, calm and patient. Clara approached him, her heart racing with a mixture of fear, curiosity, and acceptance. "You've been watching me," she said, her voice steady but trembling slightly. "I've been observing," he replied softly. "Not to control, not to punish, but to help you see yourself. Sometimes we need someone outside our world to reflect what's hidden from our own eyes." Clara nodded slowly, understanding dawning. She realized that the thrill of her double life, the excitement, the secrets, were no longer enough. The observer had forced her to confront herself, to face the reality of her choices and the consequences that awaited if she continued. For the first time, she felt a clarity she had never known. The tension, the thrill, and the fear of discovery had transformed into insight and self-awareness. She could no longer hide behind convenience, charm, or distraction. She had to face her own heart, her own decisions, and the truth that had been staring her in the face all along. And as the rain fell softly around them, Clara understood that the path ahead would not be easy, but it would be honest. She had seen herself reflected in someone else's calm, watchful eyes, and that reflection had changed everything. The stage was set for a reckoning, one that would force her to make choices, confront consequences, and embrace the clarity she had long avoided. The quiet observer had done his work, and Clara's life, filled with duplicity and excitement, was on the verge of transformation. The weeks following Clara's encounter with the stranger became a turning point she could no longer ignore. The presence of someone observing her life had grown from an eerie curiosity into a force that demanded her attention. Each day felt heavier, charged with the realization that her carefully balanced double life was fragile, precarious, and perhaps unsustainable. She started noticing details she had overlooked before: the subtle kindness in Ryan's voice, the way he remembered insignificant things about her week, and how his hand brushed hers in moments that felt completely natural, unforced. Ryan was not flashy, and he never made grand gestures. But the stability, reliability, and emotional connection he offered were undeniable. With him, she felt safe, grounded, and understood in a way she hadn't fully appreciated until now. Ethan, on the other hand, continued to bring excitement, laughter, and unpredictability into her life. Every interaction was a spark, every conversation a thrill. He encouraged her to think beyond the ordinary, to challenge herself, and to embrace the spontaneous side of life. Clara loved him in her own way, drawn to the energy he radiated and the freedom he seemed to embody. But alongside the exhilaration, she now felt a growing weight of guilt and awareness. The stranger's eyes had made her conscious of the duplicity in her choices. It was on a Thursday evening, as the sun dipped behind the Seattle skyline, that Clara realized she could no longer postpone confronting her reality. She left Ethan's apartment with a racing heart, not from excitement this time, but from anticipation and nervousness. She walked briskly toward the park where she had repeatedly seen the stranger, knowing that this confrontation could be the moment that finally shifted everything. There he was, seated calmly on the same bench, notebook closed, eyes fixed on the street. He did not rise or approach, but the intensity in his gaze made Clara feel exposed, as if he could see all the choices she had made and every consequence waiting silently in the shadows. She stopped a few feet away, taking a deep breath. "I need to talk," she said firmly. Her voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside her. He looked up and nodded. "I thought you might." The words were simple, but the gravity was profound. Clara began to speak, recounting her dual relationships with Ryan and Ethan. The thrill and excitement, the comfort and warmth, and the growing fear that she had lost touch with herself in the process. She spoke without shame, without embellishment, and without the usual defenses she employed to navigate her complicated life. The stranger listened quietly, absorbing every word, neither judging nor commenting. His presence was steady, almost like a mirror reflecting her soul back to her. For the first time, Clara allowed herself to see her life clearly, the choices she had made, the relationships she had nurtured, and the potential consequences of continuing on the same path. "You've been hiding," he said gently, "not from the world, but from yourself. And now you're at a point where hiding no longer serves you. The question is, what do you do with the truth you've uncovered?" Clara felt a mix of fear, relief, and determination. The thrill of secrecy, the adrenaline of living a double life, and the excitement of stolen moments had all come crashing into the realization that she could not continue as she had. The stranger had become a catalyst for clarity, a force that forced her to confront her own heart. Over the next few days, Clara reflected deeply on her relationships. She spent quiet mornings with Ryan, observing the simple joy of shared coffee, laughter over minor mishaps, and the comforting rhythm of familiarity. These moments were grounding, reminding her of the stability and emotional depth she had often taken for granted. With Ryan, she saw a life that was enduring, nurturing, and filled with quiet beauty. Ethan, too, played a role in her self-discovery. Their afternoons together were filled with spontaneity, laughter, and intellectual connection. He reminded her of the importance of adventure, of embracing life's unpredictable moments, and of nurturing her own desires. But the contrast with Ryan had become clearer. The exhilaration of excitement could never replace the substance of emotional intimacy and trust. One evening, as she walked home from Ryan's apartment, Clara noticed the stranger once again, standing near a lamppost, notebook in hand, yet observing quietly from a distance. This time, she did not feel fear. She felt clarity. His presence had guided her toward reflection, but now the decision was hers to make. She understood that life was about choices, and that clarity and honesty were the paths toward meaningful relationships and personal peace. Clara decided to take action. She knew that she had to address both relationships, not with secrecy or manipulation, but with honesty and integrity. The thrill of living between two worlds was no longer worth the anxiety, guilt, and tension it caused. She needed to make deliberate, conscious choices. The next morning, she met Ryan at their favorite cafe. She spoke from the heart, explaining her journey of reflection, the mistakes she had made, and the clarity she had gained. Ryan listened, his expression calm, and when she finished, he smiled gently. "I appreciate your honesty," he said. "It means a lot that you trust me with your truth. Let's move forward together, openly and honestly." Relief flooded Clara's heart. The decision to be truthful, to choose the path of integrity and emotional depth, felt like a weight lifted from her shoulders. She realized that the stability and trust Ryan offered were not limitations but foundations for a life that could thrive with Ethan. The conversation was different but equally important. Clara met him one afternoon at a quiet park cafe, the same location where she had often met him in the past. She explained that while their time together had been meaningful, the life she wanted required focus, honesty, and commitment. Ethan listened, nodding with understanding. "I get it," he said. "Our time was real, and I'll always value that. But I respect your decision to choose clarity and integrity. You deserve that." That conversation, though tinged with sadness, brought closure. Clara recognized that part of love and growth involved letting go when necessary, and that true relationships thrived on honesty rather than thrill alone. The lessons learned through her experiences would guide her forward. Days later, as Clara walked through the familiar streets of Seattle, she felt a new sense of calm. The stranger who had once been a mysterious observer was no longer a looming presence, but a symbol of guidance and awareness. She understood that he had been a mirror, reflecting the reality she could no longer ignore, and through that reflection, she had gained clarity. Her relationships had transformed. With Ryan, she embraced openness, warmth, and commitment. With Ethan, she held gratitude for the lessons learned and the joy shared, for she released the attachment that had fueled the complexity of her life. The tension, guilt, and anxiety that had once dominated her daily existence dissipated, replaced by a sense of peace, responsibility, and self-awareness. One evening, as she walked past the park where she had first confronted the stranger, she noticed him once more, quietly observing from a distance. This time, Clara smiled. She no longer felt fear, guilt, or anxiety. She had learned, reflected, and made choices that honored her heart and her integrity. His watchful presence had served its purpose, and now she could move forward with clarity, courage, and the knowledge that honesty with herself and others was the most meaningful path. The rain began to fall gently, tapping softly on the streets, echoing the quiet rhythm of her renewed life. Clara felt a deep sense of closure. The web of secrecy, tension, and observation had led her to a revelation that life, love, and personal growth were built not on thrill alone, but on reflection, conscious choice, and emotional truth. As she returned to her apartment that night, she felt a profound sense of gratitude. The stranger had been a silent guide, leading her through self-reflection and helping her recognize the value of integrity and emotional honesty. The relationships she nurtured now had depth, clarity, and sincerity. And for the first time in months, Clara felt truly at peace, free from secrets, balanced, and ready to embrace the life she had chosen with open eyes and a full heart. The city lights shimmered in the rain-soaked streets of Seattle, reflecting the calm determination in her heart. Clara knew the lessons would stay with her forever, that choices matter, that observation can be a gift, and that the courage to face oneself leads to a life worth living. And as she closed the door behind her, she realized that the chapter of uncertainty and secrecy had ended, replaced by clarity, honesty, and the promise of meaningful connections ahead.